Our guests are Jon Nese and Rob Lydick, the hosts of Weather World, seen here on PCN. Welcome, gentlemen. There are always potential new viewers out there, so tell them about your show. Rob, you start us off.
Yeah, Larry, thanks so much for having us tonight. So Weather World has been on for over 40 years now, and it's a weather and climate magazine show. So it kind of gives viewers in Pennsylvania and really beyond the chance to catch up on what's going on with the weather across the country, across the globe. And then we also kind of put context and perspective in that. And so it's faculty and students here at Penn State working together to produce those short-range weather forecasts, also add the context and some education along the way. So not just, here's what the weather forecast is, but also taking time to explain the why. Why is this happening? And explaining some of the different principles of meteorology, since we are based here at Penn State.
How about you, John? How do you view your contribution to the show?
I do a couple things, Larry. I mean, in addition to always getting a short-range forecast on Weather World, you can also get forecasts out into the 3 to 7 day range and even the 8 to 14 day range. So I work a little bit on those. I also contribute an educational feature every week called WeatherWise. And we have some experimental forecasts on Weather World. We'll sometimes give you seasonal outlooks in a feature called Long Shots. You can also see me on Long Shots.
Again, I'm thinking of those potential new viewers out there, gentlemen. So, of course, we all know there are several sources for weather on TV. You have the Weather Channel, you have your local news. So how do you distinguish your show from what the other guy is offering?
Yeah, we both had experience working in local TV. My career started out working at a station in Bangor, Maine, made my way to the Midwest in Fort Wayne, Indiana before coming back here. But one of the distinguishing features about the show is that we don't have commercial breaks kind of smack in the middle. And so we have a chunk of 14 or 15 minutes, depending on how you look at it, to explain the weather. So we can go more in depth. We give a full statewide forecast. We're looking at surface maps. We're kind of getting into the weeds of it and really kind of explaining what's going on with weather way above where we are here at the surface, and looking ahead, as John mentioned, that could go out even months with some of the forecasting segments that we have.
Your show originates from Penn State University. Just how significant is that to the content of your show?
Well, being part of Penn State, we come from an educational environment. I mean, I teach right now on Tuesdays and Thursdays. And so I spend a lot of time in the classroom working with undergraduate students. And the show also gives us an opportunity to, as faculty and staff, to work with students, both undergraduates and graduate students, preparing them for their future careers.
Rob Lydick, let's examine your responsibilities as executive producer. Just what do you have to do?
Yeah, so I've been back in my role for a little over 5 years now, came back in late 2018, and every day is different. I always look forward to coming in to work every day, mostly because of the people that I get to work with. People like John, Marissa Ferger, Bill Syret, Ben Reppert, and of course, the students. And so it always begins with kind of looking at a snapshot of what the weather is for that particular day. We're going to have forecasts. We're going to have on different specialized segments. So that could be our snow risk segment. It could be climate watch, and different segments that take a look at, how we've been doing maybe in terms of snowfall or what's the temperature anomaly been like, and also putting context on that. I like to work with students on a segment that we do on Mondays called #Headlines, where it's a recap of what's been trending in weather and climate news. And the student actually writes that segment. Then they record it, and they do some video editing. So a lot of the skills that a local TV station would expect a student to have, so writing, the video production, being on camera, they actually get that experience here with some of the same technology that you would see at a local TV station. The weather graphics that we use are the same graphics that I used when I was in local TV. So every day is a little bit different. once we record some of the segments, we're down here in the studio, and we've got students who serve as hosts. Some of them are actually as forecasters, and we're practicing before the show. We're kind of getting some of the next batch of students ready to go, whether that be in the coming weeks or months even. And so a lot really goes into producing the show. I'm the only full-time person whose job is devoted to bringing the content every day. I've got a lot of help along the way, but I really make it my point to make sure that we are delivering the best program that we can.
Rob, you took a break from
mentioning, if I could dovetail off of that, Larry, simply that the number of hours that go into producing the 15 minutes of weather you see every day behind the scenes, I hate to use the word countless because we can always count them, but there are many hours that go into producing what you end up seeing as the finished product.
John, let's talk about your background. Where did you go to school for meteorology, and why did you get into that field?
Yeah, I'm originally from Steubenville, Ohio. Grew up always wanting to be with my dad on a baseball field as he was a coach, so very sensitive to the weather in the spring. Admired the television meteorologists in the Pittsburgh market. Came to Penn State, got my degrees here, and then headed off in a different path, worked at the Franklin Institute Science Museum in Philadelphia for 5 years, and then at the Weather Channel for 3 years before returning here as a faculty member in 2005.
So, gentlemen, let's get down to business. We're talking about winter weather here today. So what is the outlook, and how is winter progressing so far in Pennsylvania? What kind of data have you gathered that compares it to winters past?
Yeah, so we actually issued our own official winter weather outlook, I think back in early November, and that's a team effort. So it's myself, Jon Nese, Kyle Imhoff, who's the Pennsylvania State climatologist, and we also met with the rest of the weather communications group here at Penn State and put together our outlook looking at things like El Nino, looking at some different forecast model products that go out for the whole season. And so I think I included a graphic here for you to show the viewers of our forecast that we did issue all the way back in early November.
Yeah, it has temperature, precipitation, and snowfall indicated.
Yes, exactly. So we called for it to be 2 to 4 degrees above average statewide. We did hint at the fact that December would be notably warm, and I don't want to toot our own horn, but I think that worked out quite well.
Yeah, you don't want to count your money when you're sitting at the table, but so far this forecast for the winter's worked out very well.
Yeah, and just focusing on temperature, there's a graphic here that I have just looking at the December snapshot, departure from normal temperature. You can see across the Northeast, temperatures range from 4 to 8 degrees above average. It was pretty torchy, as we like to say, kind of behind the scenes here. And then even looking at just the year 2024 so far, the temperature anomaly has been very positive, especially in northern New England, but even here in Pennsylvania, most of the Commonwealth already 1 to 3 degrees above average, despite this recent chill that we've had. So we're already off to a warm start.
Yeah, and we also called for, and this wasn't much of a stretch, Larry, there to be more snow than there was last winter. And there certainly has, and it feels more wintry, but most of the state is still below average snowfall-wise for this winter season. And we're heading into a period where temperatures will be largely above average for the next 2 weeks, generally speaking. So prospects for big snows are not high in the next couple weeks.
Rob, I'm looking at that graphic.
Been wet.
Rob, I'm looking at that graphic you mentioned a minute ago that has to do with December temperatures. And as I look at it, it seems that Pennsylvania is kind of bifurcated as far as the hottest part of the state. So that makes me think about it must be different to live in, say, the northwestern part of the state as opposed to the southeastern part.
Absolutely. And that's one of the changes, looking at a state as big as Pennsylvania, that's one of the things that we really try to focus on with our forecasts here on Weather World, because there's a big difference if you're living in a place like Erie versus Harrisburg or Philadelphia, because of the topography and the size of the state, influence of the Great Lakes, influence of the oceans. And with the storm track that we've been seeing, that certainly leads to some of the differences, not just in temperature, but also in precipitation. It's been anomalously wet so far this winter, and we're really seeing a lot of the wetness kind of centered on the eastern third or so of Pennsylvania, which is something you would expect to see with a El Nino pattern.
Yeah, the bifurcation you speak of, Larry, yes, it's been slightly warmer in the northern half of the state with respect to average than the southern, but still the entire state has been warmer than average so far this winter. The bifurcation is actually more dramatic in precipitation, with in the eastern half of the state well above average, in the western half of the state either close to average or slightly below.
And speaking of precipitation, gentlemen, that makes me think of another graphic that you fellas worked on, and it has to do with the forms that precipitation take in wintertime. And obviously you have your snow, your sleet, your freezing rain, and rain. But there's different conditions that lead to those different forms of precipitation. For example, tell me more about the difference between sleet and freezing rain.
Yeah, we're looking at what's going on in all levels of the atmosphere, and where you kind of have the warm air on top of the cold air, different things like that. You can see on the graphic that we shared. And it really, for something like freezing rain, you're looking at a pretty large column of warm air, but it might be freezing right at the surface, which can allow that precipitation to melt as it falls through the warm column, but then freeze as it hits on contact. That's really kind of a situation that a lot of us hate to see. It really makes for tough driving conditions, walking on sidewalks, things like that. In terms of sleet, there might be enough of a kind of a shallow warm layer that it allows what is initially frozen way up in the atmosphere to melt before eventually kind of freezing again in a larger column above the ground. So you kind of get those sleet or solid pellets that kind of bounce off the surface.
Yeah, I mean, there is a significant difference between the two forms of precipitation, Larry. A lot of people lump them all into one, but the sleet, as Rob said, is these little pellets of ice. So if you're outside and you have your winter coat on, when they hit your coat, they'll bounce off your coat. Freezing rain, on the other hand, when it hits your coat, it's in liquid form. It's rain, and it will freeze on any surface that is below freezing, which of course won't be your coat, but it could be your windshield. It could be your sidewalk. I like to think of the situations to get those exotic forms of precipitation, such as sleet and freezing rain, as a warm air sandwich. You have cold air on the bottom, warm air in the middle, and cold air on top of it. And if you get that sandwich, you can get those weird forms.
Let's take a step back in our discussion, gentlemen. And Rob, you mentioned a few minutes ago El Nino. So early in our show, I knew that was something we had to refresh ourselves on. So explain El Nino to us in simple terms, if you can.
Yeah, well, folks who tune in to Weather World know that we talk about El Nino or La Nina to a large degree because it's one of the more predictable influences of weather patterns here in the lower 48. We had said all the way back in the fall that there was a burgeoning El Nino, and that would be the primary influence in this season's overall winter pattern. And so with an El Nino, what that means is we're looking for a warm temperature anomaly in sea surface temperatures in the equatorial Pacific. There's a graphic actually that I've sent showing water temperature anomalies, and so we're looking. If you pull that graphic up, you're looking just off the coast of South America. There, you can see some of the oranges and the reds. That's a snapshot just from yesterday, showing that the temperature anomaly is positive, maybe on the order of 4 degrees by this graphic. Showing that we've got a positive temperature anomaly. That's El Nino. If you see a negative temperature anomaly, that's La Nina. And so when you look at the overall influence, there's a graphic I sent called El Nino pattern. And you can see that it actually influences the positioning of the jet stream, and that can have some influences on precipitation, where you see some nudges of warmer air, drier air. And we actually expected that to be the primary cause of kind of the difference in precipitation west versus east in Pennsylvania for this particular winter season.
Rob, you rightly pointed out that viewers of Weather World know about El Nino. They're accustomed to hearing that. So that puts me in the mind of having to ask you a super basic question that'll make the sophisticated Weather World viewer cringe a little bit. So why do we have winter?
why do we have winter?
Why do we have winter?
The seasons.
Yeah, well, it's all about the tilt of the Earth on its axis, Larry. I think most people at some point in their education know that the Earth is tilted on its axis. And because of that, at different times of the year, the sun's rays will strike the Earth directly in the northern hemisphere and indirectly in the southern hemisphere. And in those months, when the sun's rays are more directly impinging on the northern hemisphere, we have summer. And for us, that is, the warm season, May, June, July, August.
So indulge me, gentlemen, on one more basic question then. So Earth's distance from the sun, what role does that play this time of year?
It doesn't really play any role, Larry. I mean, the distance from the Earth to the sun does change over the course of a year, but the changes are so minor that they do not really cause temperature changes on Earth. If that was the case, it would be the same season everywhere on Earth at the same time, and it's not. I mean, right? It should be summer when we're closer to the sun and winter when we're farther, but that's not the way it works. In fact, the Earth is closest to the sun during our winter, which is not intuitive and definitely proves that that's not why we have seasons.
Thank you, John, for indulging me on those questions that are brought out in detail when you go to school, but maybe people forget when they become adults. So it's nice to go over that again. Now let's talk about the system.
John's even done a feature showing that Harvard grads have messed that up.
There you go.
There's a video out there. Go ahead, Larry.
Let's talk about the system of alerts for watching the weather. You have your watches, your warnings, your advisory. Now refresh us on what those terms mean so we can better appreciate you fellas when you make your forecast.
Those are products that are issued by the National Weather Service, and they have different criteria depending on where you are. And so the threshold for, say, a warning might be different if you live in Erie versus, say, Southeast Pennsylvania. But the whole purpose of having these winter or just regular alerts in general, weather alerts, are to kind of give the public a heads up. They're done in different ways in different countries. I know that in the UK, they do a color coordinated system. Our watches and warnings and things like that are, they do have colors, at least that we show on our maps. But again, they're also assigned by the National Weather Service. And so for winter, a winter weather advisory is a lot of times something that they're just trying to give a heads up to. This could be inclement weather that could be impacting the viewing area, whether that be in the form of freezing rain or ice, or maybe some snow that may impact some travel. And then there are thresholds for when they issue, say, a winter storm watch or a winter storm warning. And most of those coincide with the amount of snow. So I believe the threshold in Southeast Pennsylvania is 6 inches.
Yeah, I'm not sure what it is. But it can, the thresholds can differ. I think it's important, Larry, as a kind of a analogy with the difference between watches and warnings. Imagine you're getting ready to make cookies and you have all the ingredients out for making cookies. So one could say that a cookie watch is in effect, that all the ingredients are in place for cookies to happen. But once you put all the ingredients together and you put the cookies in the oven, then we would issue a cookie warning because it's actually happening. And so the same thing can be done, but substitute a different word for cookie. Instead of cookie, think of it as winter storm, severe thunderstorm, or tornado. So that's kind of the difference between watches and warnings.
Let's consider, gentlemen, what advances in technology have been made recently that's made your job easier?
Oh, good one. Well, I was going to say just the fact that everything's so mobile, I can use an iPad and kind of look at different graphics and things like that.
You have the world at your fingertips on your tablet.
Absolutely. And not to mention, I look at the radar app on my phone all the time, wherever I am. So I think that things have been made increasingly more mobile and accessible has been a game changer for the industry. The fact that so many different entities have weather apps now that you take the weather forecast or the current conditions with you on the go. In terms of technology here in the studio, I think that things are changing. We're still using chroma key technology here here and kind of the same technology that's been used for a while. It's tried and true, but there are innovations certainly with 3D graphics and different things like that that enable broadcasters to tell the forecast in a different way.
And from the standpoint, Larry, of technology that helps forecasters, the computer models continue to get better every year. In fact, there are computer models being run right now that try to forecast the weather down to about a mile, the difference between the points. That's a very high resolution, and we can have access to those models. And the newest round of satellites have new detectors on them that can sense lightning from space, which is very useful when it comes to forecasting thunderstorms, and see such granularity in the features that I wouldn't call it revolutionary, but it's an incremental improvement in our ability to observe.
Rob, let's go back to a segment on Weather World you talked about earlier called Headlines, and I'm intrigued by one of those headlines. I looked at a recent one you put online, and it had to do with a conference about phasing out the use of fossil fuels. First of all, tell me why that interests you as a meteorologist.
Yeah, so that was, I believe, part of COP28 that was going on at the kind of at the end of 2023, and we have a lot of different folks here in the Penn State Department of Meteorology and Atmospheric Science who are doing research on just how humans are impacting the planet that we live in, and so that includes what we're putting into the atmosphere, and so there is. Climate change is certainly a big topic, and we have peer-reviewed science that confirms that the climate is changing. We can see that. We highlight that in segments called Climate Watch, where we're kind of looking at, look at the anomalies that we had. And in the case of last year, it was the warmest year on record. And so that's why meteorologists are concerned about something like fossil fuels and what that means for our atmosphere. We've also looked at what that means for other things on the planet, including ocean currents and ice concentration.
Yeah, what about glaciers, fellas? What are they telling us about the future of life on Earth?
Glaciers?
Glaciers,
Yeah,
yes.
well, the research that's been done, Larry, generally speaking, on glaciers across the planet shows that a vast majority of them are shrinking in size. And if we speak about the Arctic, which isn't really a glacier, it's just frozen water. The Arctic is really a canary in the coal mine when it comes to climate change, because the amount of sea ice, it's not necessarily decreasing every year, but the long-term trends over the last 40 years are down, and more down. And just as importantly, the thickness of the ice in the Arctic. It used to be that there would be lots of thick ice in the Arctic. It would never melt during the winter. Now the Arctic is dominated by ice that's not very old, which tells us that it's refreezing every year. And so evidence from land-based glaciers and from cold places such as the Arctic clearly show that the planet is warming.
And that can have an impact on sea level rise. Our hashtag headline segment yesterday actually highlighted the fact that the Greenland ice melt is much larger than we thought, and that's having an impact on global sea level rise.
Yeah, and you have a graphic about that too, don't you, that shows rising ocean temperatures?
Yes, well, that is just the look at the water temperature anomalies right now. Yeah, and so I use that to highlight mostly El Nino, but we have seen other big time warm temperature anomalies in the Atlantic. That was one of the reasons why, despite El Nino, which usually quashes the Atlantic hurricane season, there's too much wind shear, the sea surface temperature anomalies were so positive that it still ended up being, I believe, the third most active season in the Atlantic on record.
Rob, I want to refer to your headline series just one more time, and it was entitled Miracle Baby. Had to do with a baby who was, her bassinet was found up a tree after a tornado ripped their mobile home apart. Now, more to my point, we're hearing more about tornadoes in Pennsylvania. Have there been any improvements to forecasting this particularly sudden and devastating phenomenon?
Tornadoes are a really tough thing to forecast because they happen sometimes. We can see the setup, what may be favorable for tornadoes, but sometimes it's really hard to get such small scale details kind of refined. I think that in general, the National Weather Service has shown that lead time on average has increased with tornado warnings. That's not always the case, but on average. And I think that, as John kind of highlighted, as our forecast models and technology continues to improve, that gives us a better idea on when conditions may be favorable for something like this to occur.
The challenge in Pennsylvania, Larry, is that the really nasty tornadoes, the ones that are ranked high on the scale, which goes from 0 to 5, the ones that are ranked 2, 3, 4, and 5, are usually well forecast. Now, the good news is that we generally don't get that kind of nasty tornado in Pennsylvania. The bad news is the tornadoes that we do get are generally rated 0 and 1, and they're tougher to forecast because they often form in marginal situations where it's not obvious that you're going to get a tornado. And so for that reason, it is challenging in Pennsylvania, but in a good sort of way, because we don't generally get the nasty tornadoes here.
Now, I'm assuming you get feedback from viewers. So what are they saying to you? What would they like more of? What would they like less of?
Oh, interesting. We love viewer feedback, and we had quite a few viewers who came out and saw us at the Pennsylvania Farm Show. We wanted to give a shout out to PCN, of course, for having us. Thanks again. Also, we had quite a few viewers who gathered last summer and came up for the 40th anniversary open house that we had. And the feedback that we got has been really positive about our students. I think that was something that I really took away from both events, how much they love seeing the students grow from maybe their first time on camera to when they graduate, and then seeing, how they go and blossom in their careers. So I loved hearing that feedback, and the feedback that we also get. People really appreciate just how in depth we can go with some of the forecasts.
And I think folks, Larry, like our contests. We have a contest surrounding the first 1-inch snow of the year, where viewers get to forecast. And then starting in February, we will have our annual trivia contest. 20 multiple choice questions thrown at viewers, and some neat prizes at the end.
Yeah, that one's always a favorite. We kick that up on February 5th. We'll kick things off, and we've upped the ante on some of the prizes this year. We're excited.
Larry, you are not eligible to win a prize.
Oh, shucks. Just 1 minute left, gentlemen, and in the interest of balanced coverage here at PCN, Phil the Groundhog, after all, is a big deal here at PCN. We always televise his forecast. It's his intuition versus your science. How do you coexist in peace? Take 30 seconds to answer that, Jon Nese, if you would.
I have learned over time to coexist with Phil. He does his thing, we do our thing, and somehow we managed to have fun with it. I think what helped was meeting Phil and his handlers. They've been to Penn State Meteorology Department twice. We've become friends. I think that makes all the difference in the world.
Our guests have been Jon Nese and Rob Lydick, the hosts of Weather World, seen here on PCN. Thank you.
Thank you, Larry.
Thank you, Larry.